The world of YouTube gaming is filled with pitfalls. Many creators who quickly rise to the top can just as quickly come crashing down. From the recent scandals at Rooster Teeth to the Fall of Machinima, the gaming landscape resembles an active minefield. So how is it that one solitary figure has evaded these common hazards, reputation intact? This is the story of Uberhaxornova. Known for being a little bit loud and a little bit "Hey! We gotta go!" impatient. I wouldn't let him borrow your gaming controller. You may recognize him from the gaming crew The Creatures or the destructive dream team over at Cowchop. But don't let this personality fool you. Underneath is somebody quite different. As we'll soon come to learn, the life of a YouTuber isn't all it's cracked up to be. But to find out, we need to go back to the very beginning, in a time where Nova wasn't even Nova at all. From Dead Island to Minecraft, WWE to Mario, you name it, Nova probably raged playing it. It may come as a surprise that in the beginning, Nova was not a man in search of attention. In fact, far from. Growing up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, this WWE-obsessed 18-year-old was nothing really more than your typical American teenager. Never could he imagine that one day he'd be duking it out with the bro army, or slipping and sloshing in a bath of lube. See, like many fresh out of high school kids, he had no idea what to do next. Not a real fan of working for the man, he had always considered himself a creative. Initially applying to art school, and after filling out all the necessary paperwork, paying all the fees, and just outright excited to start his life, James was ready to sign up for classes. One problem.
I was going in to figure out my schedule, and it was filled up. The school was filled up.
Classes were full up. And since they wouldn't adjust his schedule, he said, budget. So with school on the chopping block, what was this young lad to do? Well, over here at our barely legible Nova YouTube timeline, things weren't going according to plan for James. School was out of the equation, so what do you do next? Naturally, begin your life as a working stiff over at the local Twizzler factory. Now, James quickly discovered that becoming the Candyman wasn't exactly a sweet dream. And it was during this time of sticky uncertainty that one particular pastime would right this rudderless ship: video games. And we need to remember, at this time on the internet, video games were taking huge strides on a little video upload site called YouTube. Add Nova to this new equation, and what do you get? Some epic meme moments.
It covers my nose! I just paid it. No! The warden! Oh. No! You broke! You broke!
And with one YouTube suggested username later, Uberhaxornova was off to the races. The story of Paragon Nova is really the story of YouTube gaming as a whole. You see, in 2008, the YouTube landscape was a very different place. Gaming was a new entertainment attraction, and like anything shiny and new, there were those looking to make a profit out of it. Insert Machinima. One of the early multi-channel networks, Machinima began spinning a web of its own, forming partnerships with many a gamer of the time, allowing them to earn income for their videos, the caveat that they get a slice of the profits. And it was with this partnership with Machinima that James' life really began to change. 5 words: Road of the Rising Dead. And while there would be many series that ultimately made Nova the internet sensation that he is today, to many, Dead Rising was a turning point. Despite being incredibly obscure and mostly lost, Dead Rising was possibly one of the most important series to James' career. In addition, he was given an extra push when his videos were uploaded to Machinima and also featured on Machinima Respawn. What would follow was an eventual Dead Rising playthrough with friend Spoon. This was truly the moment that began to catapult James' career and also showed his strength for collaboration. But you see, life wasn't all gumdrops and jelly beans. James was still working full-time, selling his soul to the corporate Candyman. But when that first YouTube check came in from Machinima, it was hasta la vista, Twizzler & Co. Because from that moment forward, it was only upwards and onwards. But you see, it wasn't ultimately YouTube that changed Nova's life. As we'll soon come to realize, it was the friends that he was about to make along the way that truly made all the difference. To go over the entire history of Nova as a creator is a truly daunting task. And while he holds many a nostalgic series under his belt, it was ultimately his verbose persona that drew the crowds. A persona that from day one has practically remained unchanged.
I want to say baby! Yeah!
But is this truly who James is behind the lens? We'll explore this. Not long after his channel's launch, this uncaged personality not only caught the eyes of viewers, but also the passing gaze of fellow creators. One in particular, Cowchop. Up until this point, James had discovered a great friendship with other YouTube creator, Spoon, who under this Machinima umbrella had also been connecting with this other crew of quirky characters, eventually known as the Creatures. But you see, not every opportunity was all it was cracked up to be. After this so-called Creature crew began collaborating with James, it was only a matter of time before Nova was invited onto their aptly named podcast, Creature Talk, becoming an official member. This decision would set James on a new course, one that would ultimately change his life forever. But not all of it for the better. James' induction into the Creatures was truly a life-altering opportunity. Though to really maintain any group collaboration, you have to keep some sort of camaraderie and group consensus. Two qualities that at the time the Creatures had in spades. Their videos made you feel like it was just you and the boys hanging out. Though when talking about the Creatures, it's easy to forget that James was still an independent creator, and 2011 was a year of many firsts. From Try Mountain Survival to Draw My Thing, Nova brought his community a plethora of meme memories, including Yup.
Broke the rules! Everyone's gonna be mad at me! You broke the rules!
A series of short rage videos that solidified James' off-the-rails attitude in the YouTube history books. This year also seeing the start of his dedicated WWE channel, Nova Pipe Bomb. Now it's pretty clear early on that Nova was going to be a key attraction to this gaming squad. After a few years of connecting via Skype, the crew wanted to get a little more intimate. That's right, going from just friends to business partners. And as we'll soon come to find out, business and pleasure can be a dangerous combination, especially when not everyone is on the same page. You could argue that James didn't need the Creatures to be successful, and when the rest of the crew wanted to relocate to Colorado for better business opportunities, Nova was resistant to make the move. But another Creature had something to say about that.
As I said, I was originally not planning to move out to Denver in the first place. However, I got pulled into a Skype call with Sly. He's like, if you don't go, this thing is going to fail. That's what he said.
Without this push from Sly, James' time at the Creatures could have ended right there and then. Thankfully though, it didn't, and with a hop, skip, and jump, James was off to the mile-high city, Littleton, Colorado. But if you thought the tension was over, in reality, it was only getting started. The first Creature house was a big step in James' creative life, committing more than ever before to creating content and this new Rooster Teeth business model. Though as you may know, buying your first house can be a big decision. You don't really know people until you lived with them. And well, they were all about to find out.
I heard you want to play the sausage with me.
And while James would ultimately contribute to a plethora of unforgettable Creature moments, don't let this comedic foreplay fool you. This was no longer just a group of friends playing video games. It was now an official business, and with that, a line that everyone needed to toe. But for some members, not everyone was pulling their equal weight. The first bit of drama coming when original member Max came under fire for not pulling his equal share. Some of the members accusing Max of not showing up for work and overall being lazy. So it came down to a vote to expel Max from the crew. But Nova honestly wasn't having it. See, James was not the political type, and ultimately abstained from the voting process, leaving it up to the other members. Ultimately, Max was evicted at the hand of other members Kutra and Dan. But what this group didn't see coming was that this vote was a foreshadow for many future departures to come. Now, I know I've left out a lot of details, and if you want to know the full story, you can check out my video on the creatures in the link up above. After all, this is James's story. The creature's a big dang part of it. But back here over on planet Nova, he was in a war of his own. A war with PewDiePie. 2012 was a big year for gaming, but it was an even bigger year for Nova. Represented here by his favorite candy, Twizzler, hitting 1 million subscribers was a huge milestone for any creator during this YouTube timeline. But you see, for Nova and PewDiePie fans, hitting it at the same time was a cause for war. A fan war. And at the tail end of 2011, one game by the name of Happy Wheels was taking over YouTube. And while today many of your favorite creators jump on the trending game of the day, back here when PewDiePie fans saw Nova playing Happy Wheels in their sub feed, they weren't having it. What ensued was an outright battle in the comments section. And well, let's be frank, this fan war was nothing more than a petty bit of fun between creators. It's a good example of just how influential James was with his audience. And while Nova never ended up winning the sub battle with PewDiePie, he still had a lot going for him over with the creatures, who in 2013 were gonna ramp it up big time. Most of the group surviving a full year without any major injury, the lease on their first house was up, and a change in scenery was decided. The second house was a content goldmine. In 2013, it felt like a true community, 500,000 strong, with no signs of slowing down. And neither, by the way, was Nova, who, just fresh off of surviving Telltale's Walking Dead, was making moves of his own. 2013, a critical year for one unforgettable bromance between one Nova James Wilson Jr. and Immortal HD, their series Battle Block Theater being the sticky, gooey goodness that brought them so much closer.
Are you serious right now?
An epic collaboration that would one day manifest possibly their greatest creation. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. That's because everything good must eventually come to an end. And over the next few years, James, who had never been in search of this kind of attention, honestly getting quite a lot of it. His artistic contributions constantly pushing the envelope, 2013 ending in a bang. And while the creature's success allowed James to experiment with skits and the creation of some unforgettable characters, by 2014, things would yet again take another drastic turn. Remember, the creatures were a business, and some members began to think that it was about time that they started looking the part. Naturally, moving up in the world, the crew decided to get an official hub, a so-called creature hub. Though these times weren't always easy for James. In fact, there were some rather hard times.
Please, you 52 days! 52 days!
Hey, don't do the crime if you can do the time. Meet Afroed felon Denied Anal, a no-good street-walking, leg-stealing, whacked-up criminal.
Oh my god! Oh my god, his leg came off!
Not only one of Nova's greatest works of art, second only to maybe Accepted Anal, but a clear fan favorite. A series so nice he was requested to play it twice. And while Nova's solo career was honestly going off without a hitch, back over at the hub, this new move to a more corporate environment, while proving fruitful, also brought a whirlwind of changes. Some of them not so welcome. The first coming when fellow member Cy Foxhound became the first person to depart since Max's controversial ejection. leaving for family-related reasons. It didn't change the fact that the number of X-creatures was growing, and that their corporate influence was growing along with it. Something that James would eventually come to not appreciate. That being said, bigger business brought more meaningful opportunities. Opportunities to make a child's Make-A-Wish dream come true. James' affinity for charity work, one of the sweet quirks of online relevance. And with their spirits high and pockets full, it was time for another epic adventure. I'm talking about, of course, the road to E3. And after a long drive on the road, there's nothing better on the stomach than a little Del Taco. Meat so fine, you'll want to have it a second time. These were truly the best of times. But underneath this goofy friend group persona, a storm was a-brewing. Behind the scenes, some contention was growing yet again. James wanting to take more creative risks, and Kuchra less willing to experiment. If you were watching in 2015, you got the feeling that something was a little bit off. Among all the familiar faces, someone had on and off disappeared. Seamus. Seamus would eventually call it quits with the creatures. With 3 major players down for the count, a theme had been developing. Even so, it seemed like things were business as usual. But that was the problem. It was becoming very business focused. And for 2 members in particular, they were quickly approaching a boiling point. See, over the past few years, this group had departed from its original attraction. Just a couple of friends playing video games, getting into random shenanigans. The team had faced its fair share of challenges, and together, they made it through a lot. But this year would be different. The group looking more unfamiliar by the day. It all came to a head when newer member Dex famously walked off of Creature Talk. At the time, possibly a bit of an overreaction, but later on, a catalyst. Eventually leaving the group altogether, it was later revealed that James was the only one to speak up for Dex during this situation. It begs the question, was there more tension going on behind the scenes that on camera we couldn't see? Throughout James and Alex's time at the Creatures, there had been a number of falling outs, with members joining only to leave, and not always on good terms. These frustrations adding up, leading to a channel's slow decline and differing opinions concerning creative direction. Then, in a flick of a switch, everything changed. James and Alex announcing they'd be ditching their creature digs for a decked-out cow couch, leaving the corporate YouTube life behind, or so they thought. Now, YouTube has seen the coming and going of many a group collaboration, but none of them have been quite as chaotic a story as Cowchop. If you liked video games, skits, and destruction, this was your YouTube destination. And the house was something else. Though off to a fresh start, it wasn't always roses and rainbows. For one, you have 4 dudes working together. It was incredibly unsanitary.
Oh! It went on my nose.
This poor house would endure what the wiki describes as the most inhuman treatment possible. The common themes of food being thrown around on a regular basis, holes in the walls a frequent addition to new home decor, and fireworks among other things threatened the very house's survival. But you see, that was also part of the draw. But for these 2 chaps who had been in search for some creative freedom for so long, well, they had finally found it. From salt shoddies and camping trips gone awry, they got kicked out of shopping centers. Oh, and did I mention that they lit things on fire? The entertainment was as endless as human stupidity, though it didn't come without a little pain.
Ow! Ow! Ow!
What was beautiful was that everything they made was theirs and theirs alone. After all, James was the master of lore and creator of the bonfires. And while their neighbors probably had some rough language to describe this band of misfits, the fans, they loved it. And while listen, I could go on talking about Cowchop all day long, I actually did a whole video about it, linked in the description below. You see, what was more important about Cowchop was the effect it had on James. Throughout their run, you could see a drastic improvement in James' physical and mental well-being. From the very beginning, he made it clear who he wanted to be. And by 2016, 3 million subscribers on his main channel, and having begun what was probably one of their most successful group endeavors. James had a very different mindset about what success meant to him.
I've done most of what I've set out to achieve on my own, and my only goal now is to make sure that my friends are taken care of.
Wow. Now that quote is very telling of Nova's character. Now, that being said, as we all know, good moments are just segments of a program in between long infomercials of disappointment and regret. That's because everything got turned upside down when one snitch arrived.
A little over a week ago, somebody from the audience, I guess, decided to snitch.
This, in many ways, was the first nail in the coffin, and I'm gonna tell you why. Now, while the Cowchop crew thrived on taking chances with extreme content, when one individual decided to take it upon themselves and let the landlord in on the group's activities, well, he didn't appreciate it. Kicking this herd out to pasture, forced to regroup in less than optimal filming circumstances. This clearly affected everyone, but what would come next affected James probably the most. The rise of Cowchop came at an interesting time in the history of YouTube. It was kind of the calm before the storm, pre-apocalypse but within the shift of major YouTube policy changes. When many other creators had to pivot to meet the coming tides, James kept true to his passion. No matter the mindset, the simple fact was, YouTube wasn't filling up their piggy bank. If it wasn't for their dedicated fan base, this story could have ended right there and then. Thankfully though, raising enough money through their partnership with Rooster Teeth's first program, this barn era debacle was about to be over. Once again, setting off for greener pastures, this time heading for the land of angels, Los Angeles, California. A move that held a boatload of opportunity, but also a dumpster full of not so fruitful consequences. One more road trip and one final warehouse. Here in LA, we would see possibly some of James' most ambitious content. Now, being able to collaborate with other Rooster Teeth associated channels such as Funhouse and Sugar Pine 7, bigger wasn't always better. You see, by this point in James' career, he had poured all of his heart and hard-earned coin into this passion project, never straying from their original destructive path to meet the current online climate. Cowchop had grown into more than just another group of friends having a good time on camera. You see, they too were a business. And if you remember, James has a rough history with these kind of things. And as time went on, we would begin to see a familiar pattern that the former creatures had also been plagued with. Slowly, one by one by one, some of our favorite cast and crew also went off to pursue their own greener pastures. But don't get me wrong, Cowchop was an amazing jumping off point for many of the people who worked there. It opened doors that wouldn't have been made available without Nova. James was ultimately fulfilling his original purpose, taking care of his friends. But now, after all this achievement, was it too beginning to take a toll on his own state of mind? Los Angeles becoming sort of a gilded cage for Nova. The spotlight, which James had never really yearned for, was now becoming somewhat blinding. There were talk of TV shows and hosting gaming events, and though he kept a brave face wanting to slowly transition himself more into the background, roadblock after roadblock kept him front and center. And despite his best efforts to keep pushing forward, it would only take one slip up to push him over the edge. His skills from Skate 3 not translating to real life, this injury would result in James taking a short leave of absence from the channel, a lacking presence that we would all soon have to become comfortable with.
I am going to be leaving Cowchop.
At the time, a shock for many fans, but behind the scenes, a decision that had been brewing for quite some time. In my mind, this last incident may have been the final nail in James' coffin. The years of pushing through to pursue the dream simply wasn't fulfilling James' happiness any longer. And knowing James, he had to keep true to himself. In his own words, I felt like I had accomplished everything I had set out to do.
I'm sorry that it had to kind of just happen.
Oh, but if you thought James' story was over here, yeah, you would be wrong. That's because as we approach current times, in this post-group channel world, I think it's safe to say that he may be happier than he's been in a long, long time, finding a little peace and solace on a little streaming site called Twitch. Yeah, I'd say James is A-okay. In fact, maybe a little better than okay, having now made a name for himself in the no-pixel GTA community. And remember at the beginning when I said James had always remained true to his character? I wasn't completely telling the truth when I said he never really changed. Just like the world of YouTube gaming, this genre is a far cry from the simple Let's Play origins we used to see. With online censorship impacting more and more creators, James has weathered this storm of change, but in the process has gone through an evolution of his own. But to still be here, alive and kicking over a decade since launching your YouTube channel, when so many others have, quote, sold out to the man, you could say that James is truly one of the last real creators on the platform. I think it's safe to say that in many ways, Nova was an important part of YouTube's story. And over here at our crudely drawn Nova leaderboard, to answer our question, can James remain relevant in this ever-changing online world? And while many could say that his glory days are firmly behind him, when it comes to the word relevance, I don't think he really cares. Being popular was never the ultimate goal. Sure, it allowed him to make a living and live his dream. But if we look over here, number 2, Nova was far from willing to sell out for a quick buck. In fact, becoming too business focused was a major reason he left the creatures for Cowchop in the first place. And when that endeavor became too much to handle, he respectfully walked away. That's because with number 3, we know that James always stayed true to his character. It was evident since early days that he's always been considerate of helping others. Done on purpose. Whether it was doing insane things for charity or simply just wanting to make sure his friends were all set up. I think if we were to ask James what he considers the most important part of his life thus far, he'd probably tell you to shut up and leave him alone. But I don't think it would be the numbers or the accolades. Rather, I think he would say it was inspiring the millions of people along the way that for him made this job worth it. Remember, I'm Ryan, and I'll see you in the next video.